joining us today for the first episode in our series, Law in Life. I would like to start by acknowledging the Darkin young people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and acknowledging their elders past, present and emerging. We are hoping that through our series Law in Life, we can give you some tools and answer some questions to help you navigate some of the situations you may find yourself during your life. We will also be bringing along expert panellists to give you some information and some guidance around things that you might need to consider depending upon your circumstances. We hope that we can empower you with knowledge to help different circumstances you may find yourself in become a little bit easier for you. Today's topic is family law. Separation can be a very, very difficult and stressful time for people, and we hope that today we can provide you with some information to reduce that stress and set you on the right path. I'm Anna Cruckshank, and I'm the Managing Director of Aubrey Brown Lawyers. I will be your host during our series, Law in Life. I'm very excited to introduce our panellists today. I'm joined today by Karlye Damaso. Karlye is a registered psychologist, a neuroscientist, and a clinical psychologist registrar at HealthPoint Mingara. Karlye works with children, adolescents, families and adults and helps them in a whole range of settings with different issues that can arise. Thank you so much for joining us today, Karlye. It's fantastic to have you here. I'm also joined by Brett Gilday. Brett is a financial planner with Kelly Partners at Erina. Brett has been a financial planner on the Central Coast for many years, and we have worked very closely with him for more years than I think he and I might like to acknowledge. Brett and his team work with clients to help them grow, protect and control their assets and preserve it for future generations. Thank you, Brett. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thanks, Em.
And I'm also joined by Kate O'Grady. Kate is an accredited specialist in family law and also the team leader of our family law team at Aubrey Brown Lawyers. Kate is very caring and compassionate and dedicated to helping her clients achieve the best outcomes they can in family law situations and the difficult time that brings to their life. Kate is also an accredited family dispute resolution practitioner, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later on. So let's dive in. Gwyneth Paltrow introduced us all to the concept of consciously uncoupling. So I think that that's put a lot of people under pressure perhaps to think that they need to separate well. Is that a reality? Can people actually separate well? I might start with you, Kate.
Absolutely. So I think there tends to be a view held by people that as a lawyer you're dealing with high conflict litigation matters, and we certainly do that, but we also help a lot of people that have been able to reach an agreement, to document that and to resolve it amicably. I guess most times though people do need help to get to that stage, so it's not something that people necessarily find that easy to do by themselves. And I think it's something where you almost need a team of people to help to get to that point where you can separate well, but you absolutely can with the right support.
Thanks, Kate. And Brett, in financial planning land, are there things that people can do at the front end to help them set themselves up to separate well?
Absolutely. I think what we see a lot of is there's usually one partner who has a really good grasp on the finances and the other one may not always. And so even just getting that complete clarity on their position to begin with, emptying the cupboard, so to speak, so getting a real awareness of where they're at, what they've got, because sometimes they can go 100 miles an hour straight to what am I going to get, what's going to happen next. So just that first point of getting clarity on where they're at and getting an understanding and speaking to the right people. As Kate said, having a team around, and we've got to be aware of our roles in that as well, and that we're confidently handing over to Kate or someone else if we need to.
And how can a financial planner help people to get an understanding of those things in the initial stages of separation?
That's really our key role, is firstly fact finding, so finding all of where everything's at. And then secondly, they're embarking on almost a new life. So, and they may have not have been prepared for that. So also, you know, when they're ready, having a session with them to think about what does life look like 10 years from now, what are the things we need to do in the next 2 or 3 years to feel like they've made some progress, and documenting all that for them to give them the confidence to move forward.
Fantastic. And Karlye, it's very, very stressful for people when they're undergoing a separation. What type of support can they get at that emotional level to help them manage their emotions and separate well?
Yeah, so I think as has just been said, divorce and separation, typically most people don't enter relationships anticipating that that will be the eventuality. So there's a lot of shock that comes with that, and there's a huge sense of loss and sometimes grief that follows. So initially we tend to work from a supportive psychotherapy model, which basically means you provide a safe space for someone to explore how they're feeling and what's going on, and experience what they need to experience and validate it as a very, very difficult time. So that's kind of the first jumping off point, I think, as psychologists, what we can offer someone in this situation.
Thanks, Karlye. So, Kate, if people have reached agreement or they're close to reaching agreement, what type of legal options or frameworks are available to document the agreement and help them in those circumstances?
So it depends on whether it's a parenting matter, a parenting and financial matter. We have a whole suite of documents that we can help people to do. The most common is a parenting plan for parenting matters, which can document parenting arrangements for children, such as where children live, who they spend time, how they communicate with parents and other people that are important to them. You can put in things about who makes decisions for certain things. School holidays change over, those kind of things in a parenting plan. That's our less formal parenting document. So typically that's something that you would see come out of a mediation or a more amicable parenting arrangement, where people don't need that concrete legally binding document, which is the court order.
Great. And you've touched on the fact that there are two key elements to a separation. There's the financial part, but there's also the parenting part, and the parenting part can often be the more stressful situation for the whole family. Karlye, I might ask you, what are the signs that a child is not coping when parents are separating?
Yeah, that's a good question. The signs tend to be, I think as Kate was alluding to, that they're developmental, so we expect to see different things at different developmental stages. When we tend to look at when we start to get involved, there's kind of two scenarios where that's happening. One is if we start to see functional impairment, so these teething behaviours go beyond the stage of teething and start to actually cause problems in the child's capacity to interact in life. So can they have meaningful relationships? Is their health, their physical health starting to suffer? Is there changes in sleep, eating, that type of thing? And then also academically. So that's when we start to get involved, or alternatively if there is high conflict and mum and dad are not doing too well, mum, dad and dad, and the actual family itself is really struggling in quite a highly intense situation. So that's when we tend to start getting involved and move from that kind of supportive psychotherapy arrangement to a much more active, involved role in the system.
And what type of behaviours in the parents can make it more difficult for the children?
So there's a few behaviours that are problematic and will pop up. Usually conflict is the big one. So conflict is a normal and natural part of life, but when the conflict is unhealthy, so it's chronic, it's unresolved, it's disrespectful, and the kids can actually see that, that's when it's going to really start to create problems, and the kids are exposed to that. It's going to cause lots of distress.
And what can the parents do to make it an easier experience for the kids?
So a lot of the research shows that, and I imagine we'll probably go into more detail in this shortly, but the quicker the settlement, the better off the kids are. The less conflict, the better off the kids are. Those are big ones. So making sure we try and get this wrapped up as quickly and as cleanly as we possibly can. The other one is just recognising that although the parents might understand that this relationship is dissolved, for the kids, even if there's been a situation that hasn't been ideal, in most cases, you're going to find kids want that relationship or aspects of that relationship to remain. And they're really going to struggle to come to terms with that because they're losing something that they held really dear and valued. And so there's a huge grief period that goes on from that. And one of the hardest things, I think, for me as a psychologist when I work with families in these situations is seeing when parents lose sight of or don't have the capacity to understand a child's grief and what they've lost as the family breaks down.
Thanks, Karlye. One of the other things that I've seen a lot in separation is when people behave in a financially destructive way. And I can particularly recall some friends who were separating, and one of them, when the separation started to become apparent that that was what was going to happen, went and spent all of the money in the bank and all of the redraw on the home loan on a $150,000 car. Brett, what type of financially destructive behaviours have you seen people undertake when they're separating?
I've definitely seen that. As soon as we get any awareness that this is happening and to avoid some of the problems you were raising, we'll very quickly want to get in front of the people if we can, or have a conversation with them about how to separate well, because as much as I respect what lawyers do as well, we all know it can get incredibly expensive if they're not communicating. So destructive behaviours include emptying bank accounts, gaslighting each other, going and spending on cards that the other person had no awareness of, when I think we all know collectively a lot of these things don't end up mattering at the end of the day because they're spending part of their own money. Okay, right. So we make it very clear with them to start with that we need to everyone needs to cooperate, even though this is a difficult situation. If they need to speak, if we're looking after them as an individual, we'll quite often refer them to someone else in the office or external, so that they feel they're getting an impartial view. And we would try and avoid that at all costs if we can. That said, it happens all the time, unfortunately.
Kate, what factors can cause a high level of conflict in a separation that you've experienced?
Some of them we've covered. I think to separate well, as Karlye said, you're looking for an early resolution, and things that can stop that happening is where one person is trying to intentionally hide things or not disclose. So in a financial matter, actually in both parenting and financial matters, it's really important for both parents or parties to come to the table with an understanding of what the other person has and what the matter looks like, so that they're both negotiating on the same level. So if one person has all of the knowledge about the financial circumstances of the parties, the other person might have a level of mistrust that they're not being honest or they're not going to know how it's all going to work. So it's really important for disclosure to happen so that there's an exchange of information and documents where necessary, so that both people have an understanding of what their financial circumstances are, what things are worth, how things are structured, what entities there might be and how those things might be unravelled, which is why we work so closely with people like Brett to make sure that we're doing that in a tax effective and legally binding way. Also with parenting matters, to make sure that there has been disclosure of all relevant information, so that you can have a document or an agreement that actually properly covers things for everybody. But I guess moving forward from what you said also, Karlye, people come to separation at different stages. So you might have someone that's been thinking of the separation for years, and the other person, it comes as a complete shock. And so you kind of, whilst you want to do it quickly, you have to let them catch up, and you have to allow for that kind of grace period, especially where there's children, for the dust to settle. If you try and rush it, so it's like this double-edged sword, you don't want to drag it out too long, but you don't want to rush it because you want to make sure that they've got all of the information that they need to be able to go in making a decision based on their knowledge and understanding, but also that they've come to terms with the fact that the relationship has broken down and you've kind of given it some time for that dust to settle. That's the cases where we see the consent arrangement working best, and where the parties have been involved in reaching the decision themselves. If you have a judge making a decision for a family that they may not know the ins and outs of, it's never going to work as well as something where both of the parties have actually been involved in making that decision that's going to work best for that family.
I think it's important to remember too that a lot of the things that they have took years and years to assemble. So we need to set expectations for them that I think somewhat, as we said, to separate well, it's done quickly. Some of these things can't be done quickly, and if it's delayed before they're looked at, that makes it even worse. So for example, if they're having to transfer properties or unwind a business or a self-managed fund, things of that nature, they're sometimes going to get a tax bill 18 months later on these things, and it's just a constant reminder of the relationship that was. So we also need to be aware, whilst we like to do things quickly, some of these things do take a long time to unwind.
Thanks, Brett. Kate, is it fair to say that a high conflict separation is more likely to end up in court, and what does going to court actually look like?
Okay. Firstly, absolutely. The high conflict matters are the ones where they have a much higher chance of going to court, purely because there's only two ways that we can reach an outcome in a family law matter, parenting or property: by consent, which means that both parties have to agree, or by a judicial determination where a judge makes a decision. There's no other way. So to avoid that outcome where a judge is making a decision, they have to reach an agreement at some stage. So where that's really difficult is the cases where we have really high conflict and one person will swear that the sky is blue and the other one will swear that the sky is pink. And sometimes you just can't, no matter what you try to do to help them to reach an agreement. Some people are just hell-bent on having their day in court, of getting a judge to hear their story, and they have, notwithstanding our best attempts, to explain what that looks like, quite unrealistic expectations of what that might look like, including a judge saying, "You poor thing, that's awful. You bad person, you shouldn't have done that," which is very rare. So in terms of what court looks like, it can be a very long, drawn-out process. You're typically looking at least 12 to 18 months for a decision to be made on a final basis. If there's urgency, you might get before a judge, say in 1 to 2 months, but otherwise you're looking at least 3 months, before you get anywhere. There's also a pathway that you need to follow, so there's all kinds of procedural court events that you have to attend, and there's now compulsory mediation for both property and parenting, whereas previously it was only for parenting matters. So there's a real push to people to try to mediate where possible. There's a real push towards arbitration, which is private determination of a matter by a qualified arbitrator. So they're really trying, they've put a lot of money, a lot of resources have been invested into the new court merger to try and keep people out of the litigation pathway, because it does take so much time, it costs a lot of money, and you can guarantee that by the end of it, if they start in a very high conflict relationship, that will only get worse. It's never going to get better being involved in litigation. It just places so much stress on families, financial stress, emotional stress. And I say to people, if you have any semblance of a relationship left, and you go into cross-examination where you've got a barrister, cross-examining the other party about everything that's happened in your relationship and all the skeletons come out, how on earth will you co-parent with that person or try to move forward past that point? So we do really try to, encourage people to resolve it without going down that pathway.
Thanks, Kate. One of the things I would expect, Brett, can be really, really useful for people is to have a financial advisor run their eye over the proposed settlement before it's finalised to recognise whether there are any unidentified tax bills or other issues.
That's correct. Assets that have been bought years ago in a marriage can have very large tax implications that at least one party may not be aware of. And these need to be taken off the final figures. And sometimes they're an event, as I mentioned, that comes 18 months later. They're also, just as things cost money to assemble, there can quite often be significant cost to disassemble. And we need to make them aware they need to work closely with someone like Kate as well to avoid paying unnecessary things like stamp duties because they haven't done it in the correct manner. But as you unwind these things like companies, trusts and so forth, they should expect to pay for the disassembly. There's time and effort in the final tax returns on things that they don't want anymore. So we need to just warm them up to that as well as they disassemble what's taken them years to build.
Thanks, Brett. You have all shared some really interesting perspectives on the different elements that can come into play when people are separating. And I think that what this highlights for me is how having collaboration between a group of advisors can really help somebody get the best outcome and feel safe and supported during the separation process. And I think that by bringing a great group of people together who are able to work collaboratively and take a holistic approach to separation is a really valuable tool to help people when they're separating. And thank you so much for all of your advice today. I think for me, the key action that comes out of our discussion today is to get advice proactively, get advice early, and ask your advisors who else can be brought in to assist you to help you get the best outcome that you can in the circumstances. If you feel like you need support, put your hand up and ask for that support, and know that everybody who is involved recognises how stressful and difficult a situation it is for you, and they're all there with the very best of intentions to help you get through it in the best way that you possibly can. And thank you to you all. You have been a wonderful panel today, and we really appreciate all of your advice and your insight that you've given to us. And thank you for joining us for the first in our series, Law in Life. We hope that you found this valuable and the information will help you as you move through your separation. And we would also be most grateful if you would share, tell your friends, catch up with us on social media, and tune in for our next episode. Our next episode is going to be a change of pace. It's going to be talking about what you should be thinking about and what you need to know if you have been asked to join a board, a community association, or some other leadership role, the legal pitfalls and also the other things that you should be thinking about before you say yes. Thank you. We really appreciate you joining us today.